Hello everybody. So today Space Engineers updated and I got a new computer and I got it installed just in time to make a comment before going to bed. So I figured I would talk briefly about the update and I tease you a little bit with this ship here, which is a multiplayer carrier. So first the update. They traded a bunch of old bugs for new. So they fixed some of the bugs I was being annoyed by, such as the printers turning off everything they printed, but they also introduced a whole bunch of new bugs, so that's going to be fun. However, the real meat is that they created a whole bunch of relatively minor features that point the way towards the future for Space Engineers. The features themselves are not terribly interesting. It is what they mean for the long-term game. And we can now see very clearly where Space Engineers is going. So the major features are they radically improved the air pressurization system. They changed it so the sun moves, which is great. And they implemented a feature where you can turn off core features for players, such as you can force them to spawn in with no weapons or equipment, you can force them to spawn in with no jetpack, and other details like that. All of these combined point to a very, very powerful simulation mode coming down the line. Survival mode, I mean. Survival mode in Space Engineers right now is really anemic, to the point where in order to make it even vaguely interesting you have to invent crap, and I'm sure that you've seen Let's Players in survival mode, and almost all of them have a scripted storyline to try and spice it up some. A real survival mode, it can benefit from a storyline, but it is difficult enough and interesting enough on its own that the story evolves from you playing the game rather than having to be pitched. So we are looking at a bunch of features which are making a much more difficult survival mode. The moving sun is going to screw up your permanent supply of electricity from solar panels. The lack of jetpacks is going to make it very difficult for you to fly around. You're going to be very reliant on vehicles on planets or small spaceships in space. And the air pressure system is going to make it a lot more interesting to try and keep your bases working properly. Even already, we're starting to see some of the older designs for airlocks starting to malfunction in non-lethal but entertaining ways. And I also think that these are paving the way for more upgrades that are going to help things. For example, if you look in the code for Space Engineers, you can clearly see that there is a slot for air type or air quality. We don't yet use that, but this new simulation system is much more powerful, and that points towards them perhaps using that in the near future, and that might become something that you can manage in-game to make your interiors much more interesting and complex. I would love it, for example, if your base interior air could get contaminated by machinery or something. That would be cool. Or if you could have different kinds of atmosphere, and some of them would have different effects. That would be neat, like a healing atmosphere that was really expensive. All told, the new simulation or survival mode that I see coming down the line seems like it's going to be a lot more interesting, and it's going to make survival in itself interesting, both single player and multiplayer. And this ship might be useful in that situation. This is a multiplayer carrier. I'm going to go ahead and wait until I get together with a friend to actually record significant multiplayer footage before I share this with everyone. But the basic idea with a multiplayer carrier is you just use rotors. You can't detach from inside the ship, which is the biggest downside of this. You need to remember to hit the detach button before you do anything. But once you've detached, you can get in the ship, you can turn everything back on. Oop, I turned everything off. Brilliant. And you can float away. And the only thing you need in order to get this to work is a sensor which is set to detect 2 meters in front of it, because that is the distance in which a small rotor part will lock into a rotor. Now, the huge advantage of using these rotors rather than any other method of connecting is that these count as part of the same physics grid. With all of the other kinds of connectivity, they count as a separate physics object, and that means that they get calculated depending on who is in control of the ships independently, and you start to get in arguments with each other, and you get that shaking, and that shaking is really devastating, and that's what causes 99% of the explosions. The landing gear is the worst because it exerts the most force and therefore changes the most rapidly over time, so you'll have the most discrepancy between the different players and the largest explosions. The things that don't have quite as much force, such as these connectors, you can use them in multiplayer mode fairly safely, but you can't use them on a carrier because they don't provide enough support. The ship will float, will drift and wobble and fly away and get damaged, so you can't use them for your carrier. The real solution, the only solution that I found, is to use these rotors and lock your ships into the same physics grid. So if we accelerate now, these ships are going to be rock solid. They're not going to move at all. And the rotors can eventually get damaged and destroyed by physics forces, but the kinds of physics forces that would be applying there would only happen in certain situations and probably not on a carrier. So even in multiplayer mode, these are going to be quite stable because they're not considered separate ships. They're considered physics attachments to the central ship. However, how stable will they be? There's no way to know until I get a couple of friends in and have them have a crappy internet connection with me. That'll happen later. But I am hopeful for the future of this game. A more powerful survival mode really implies a lot of really, really neat gameplay. And that, I think, will be just tremendously fun. To show you what I mean, previously, this area, it is contained, and you can see that there's no oxygen in here. Previously, if you open this door, there would be no wind. It would just fill with oxygen. But now, there's actually a simulation of that air entering this space, and it's a realistic simulation. The air intake is ridiculous. I'm not sure precisely what's going on. I think they need to polish it a little bit there. But the basic idea is that their air simulation looks like it's become far more voxelized, far more detailed, and that means that we might see something like air quality or different kinds of air get simulated soon, which would be really neat, and that's what I'm looking forward to. Not most, but looking forward to a lot. Anyway, my new computer works, but unfortunately I haven't gotten Unity to work yet. They have some really weird licensing rules, so we'll see what happens.